I don't think every founder needs to reinvent the wheel. Like you can see it in like consumer products. Like they really just rebranded the way we look at water. But then if you go on to like the technology side of things, what are we rebuilding? There's a million PEOs out there. There's different startup banks out there. Some do it better than others. Sometimes they focus on a certain niche category and then they expand later on once they get more funding. But if you can have the same idea and just be better at it, then you can be extremely successful too. You don't necessarily always need to reinvent the wheel, just need to make it slightly better.
When you first started your first business, probably a lot of tech companies, startups probably needed a lot of funding. How would you recommend a founder look at that and say, should I raise or should I just go at this alone?
You can always have a co-founder, but I think that going alone without an investor is a different story. Again, it just depends.
Hey, Ruben, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well too. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to speak with me.
Of course. Pleasure to be here.
Of course. So I wanted to start with kind of connecting the dots. So if you could just take us back to when you were younger and what kind of things you were interested in and what you were focused on.
Sure. So as you know, I'm German, so I grew up in Germany, but so obviously a very different environment than the US. So as a German kid, I wasn't too interested in sports to begin with, but eventually I found my way to sports. But when I was really young, I was interested, obviously, like medieval stuff, comic books. I would walk home and skip the train ride home and buy myself comic books. But I also spent my money, and it's really interesting. I also spent it on McDonald's, which sort of like leads into how I found my way to sports and how I found my way to America. So what happened in the 90s? So I'm an 80s kid. So what happened in the 90s? The US started to globalize, right? So all of a sudden you had all these like American brands coming to Europe, and you're like, wow, American dream, a hamburger. So, and it was something that my parents never really, I wouldn't say like they weren't a fan of it, but like it was more like something like that was like special if you went to McDonald's. I used to there was kids that celebrated their birthdays at McDonald's, right? So like, it was like, if you think about celebrating your birthday at McDonald's now, it's kind of strange, right? Because it's like, it's everywhere. But back then, especially in Europe, you just didn't have that many American brands. So it was really something special going to like an American brand, to a restaurant. And then eventually, so what happened in the 90s and I would say like to the mid 2000s, the NFL also started to globalize, right? So then we had a summer league in Europe, and most of the teams were actually in Germany, which was called the NFL Europe. So then you had all these like American TV shows, and I was watching TV, and I think maybe I was watching King of Queens or something in the New York Jets, and I was like, I want to do that. I want to play football. And so I told my mom, and my mom was like, well, I don't know where to like look for this. It's not really something like a lot of like little German kids do. They want to play soccer, right? Or like the European football. And so she called up like the professional team, because that's the only one that she could think of. And they then guided me to my team that I ended up playing for. So then my big passion became football. I ended up becoming really good at what I do in football. Put on a lot of time. I played for the German national team. I won 4 national championships over there. And then eventually I was good enough that the NFL scouted me, and put me through like a scout program where you go through boarding school and then through university. So I actually ended up playing college football as well here in New York. So that's like my little pathway to the US. So when I tell people that I meet first, and it's like, obviously it's like many, many moons ago, very different athletic figure I have today than back then. But when I tell people, it's like, yeah, I came here for football, and they're like, oh, you're German, of course. Soccer. I'm like, no, like shoulder pads, helmet, pigskin. Okay, what? They're like, what do you play, kicker? I was like, no, I played like strong safety. So it's like, it's so funny because like they just, I guess like Americans don't put one on one together, and they think that the only sport you play, or like the only country that is like predominantly in like the football country, which it still is, but it's the US. But Germany is actually like, I think like the second biggest market outside of North America for football. So here's a little nugget for you. So it's really cool. So it's, I love football. I have a lot of friends that went pro. I obviously didn't make it pro, but that's how I found my way here. So I went to boarding school, was good enough to play in college. But then eventually I found my true passion, and that was the world of business. So I think once, and I think a lot of expats have this, because for me, playing football in the US, life goal achieved. Right, that's like, as a kid, that's what you want, right? Like, I mean, of course, if I would have played NFL, great. But the percentage of people that actually ended up playing even like high school football that are from Germany is so small, and that I actually ended up making it to play in college was a great honor. So, and it was amazing. It was like probably one of the first 15, 20 people of Germany that came to the US to play sports like this. So it's like,
wow.
so it was really cool. So I keep it close to my heart, and I think I learned a lot, obviously, by being an athlete, and to be disciplined, and like to build a team, to lead. More importantly, because I also was a team captain. So it's super interesting how those parallels and like also translate to what I do in business and how I lead my teams there.
I think that's such an incredible story, and especially like starting with something like being interested in McDonald's. It's this like novelty, and that helped you to kind of get more curious about like the American culture, and then football, and also support from your mom to kind of say, oh, you're curious about that. Let me find a team. Like, I don't know about this, but I'm going to go and find an opportunity for you. And then you kind of ran with that. So all of it is like so incredible. I could see this like playing out in a movie or something. It would be a
I'll
great
take it.
story.
I'll sell the rights to Netflix today if you find me someone that wants to buy it. No, it's just so, it's interesting because like, we talk about it a lot, globalization these days, right? And especially what's happening geopolitically. And that was really, for me, the start when I started to like understand as a child, it's like, well, okay, what does geopolitics and what does globalization look like? Right?
Yeah.
Because Chinese brand you didn't have, but everybody was like, okay, like the American dream, American brands, but Nike, obviously like Hollywood is a whole thing, right? And like sitcoms and like, so we were watching all of those. Obviously it was translated into German, which is not one film or sitcom that is as good as it is in English. Actually, that's a lie. I think White Chicks may be the only movie where the sense of humor is better in German than it is in English. I think that may be the only one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because they have some like really good punchline in German. Maybe it's equal, but like the rest is just like I cannot watch. I can't even watch German shows. It's like hell no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I am watching some German shows because I'm learning German. My partner's German, so I'm like taking like the intro classes, and our instructor is like, you should, like listen to the news, watch some shows or something. So I found a show like on Prime. It's called Maxton Hall. It's like teenager kind of show, but it's still entertaining. So I'm like, you know what? This is great. I hear it.
Rosetta Stone had the funniest commercial ever for learning German. So it was like the scene, and you see this like very like junior person of the German Coast Guard, first day on the job, and then he gets a Mayday call, and it's Mayday, Mayday, we are sinking, we are sinking. And then he's like, yes, hello, this is the German Coast Guard. What are you thinking about? It's like, learn English, Rosetta Stone.
Yes.
It's brilliant. It's so brilliant. Yeah.
I do actually remember that commercial. It's pretty funny.
It's so good. I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. But yeah, I mean, the American dream, I think it's something that's real. It is as real today, I would say, as it was back then. I work with governments as well as a subject matter expert. And so I work with the German government, with like the British, some Asian governments as well, and get invited to these like really interesting talks with like different delegations and different business leaders of their country, but also politicians. And it's really interesting how conducive the US is for business, right? It's like really like it invites a bigger picture thinker. I think that's without knowing, sort of attracted me to the US when I was a child, because I was like, okay, like obviously if you leave your home and you like hop on a flight for like 8 hours, you know, as more or less a kid, to leave your parents behind and whatnot, you have to be a bit crazy and a bit of a bigger picture thinker, right? So, and I think that drive like is still very much alive in me today. But I think in a lot of immigrants as well, and I think it's there for Americans as well. I think a few Americans just don't see it, because with all this like noise that's happening on social media and in the media in general, I think people actually like forget how good we have it in the US. So, and then that sort of led me to build my first company.
Yeah. No, those are great points. And I think the US is a place of innovation, and we have a huge history of like, you know, so many companies starting here that, as you mentioned, become global. And you had that experience at a very young age. So that leads me, I guess, to ask you, after you kind of finish that chapter in your life of playing football and you're kind of going, okay, what am I doing next? What was that process like for you? And what were you thinking about? You kind of alluded to starting a business, but, you know, any in between steps that helped you find this? Yeah.
I think it's challenging to start a business as an immigrant. Like I didn't plan on becoming an entrepreneur per se. The reason why I became an entrepreneur was because I needed to have a visa. And the only way, and it's challenging if like there's companies that don't do sponsorships now. I mean, like it's challenging to an extent too. There's new fees that are coming in. So companies really need to be sure that that talent that you're hiring, that is an international talent, is the right talent. So for me, it was challenging to find someone and to prove myself that I'm the right talent. So I started my own company and to like sponsor myself to be here. So it wasn't by design. It was really more out of a need, because I fell in love with this country. I was like, I don't want to go home. And if I would have went home, it felt like failure to me. So I had to find a way to stay here. And then in the early 2010s to like early to mid 2010s, came up with this idea, because obviously I like lived in New York and I was going out, and New York is the fashion capital of the world. And social media just became a thing, right? So you just had like Instagram being a thing. And I was like, well, there must be a way to like sort of like monetize this and help businesses to sort of like bring them a flow. Influencer wasn't really a thing. It wasn't even called influencers. It was like more like content creators or models. It was honestly like it was mostly models. But so what I did, I came up with this business idea that basically connected models and influencers with businesses. And now there's a ton of these businesses. So it was like one of the first influencer marketplaces, so to say. We were physical cards, because back then creating a whole app would have been like 200, 300, 400K, if not more, right? For like something that you can like just vibe code these days for like $20, right? So the chances you have today is so different to back then. So I was like, okay, like obviously that's a lot of money, and I'd rather like spend that money on like other areas. So we just started partnering with like different businesses. Essentially, you showed up with like a membership card, and it just gave you benefits, right? So that's how we did it. Raised some money as well through angels and like family offices, and then eventually I was able to sell it to like private investors. So that was a really interesting experience. And I didn't get rich off that business, not at all, but it was a really good first experience to actually start a business. And the only reason why that was somewhat successful was because I ended up succeeding more than I failed. But I failed from morning to evening. Like I constantly failed. And it's interesting because, and like we spoke about this briefly as well, back then the ecosystem was just so different. Like you didn't have what you have today. Even like 6 years ago, pre-COVID, the ecosystem was like very different, right? And then now post-COVID, like this entire venture ecosystem in New York, right? San Francisco had some of that, but in New York exploded, right? Like the access to resources you have, the access to like events that you have. You have so many different communities out there, right? So it's fascinating to see that. I mean, SVB, like basically wrote a blueprint how to, really like add value to early stage founders, right? And you didn't have that really back there. You had some of that, but like you really had to look for it. And I think that's also partly the reason why, like, I didn't bank with like in SVB. I went to Chase, right? When honestly I should have been with like a startup bank. But then it's like little things like that just add so much value. But like these days you have fractional CFOs, you have fractional CROs, right? So you can be really lean building your business, where back then you didn't really have that, right? So you may have accounting firms, but those were like more like small business accounting firms that didn't really understand like what like investor relations look like, what do you have to file for, right? And if they did, they were expensive, right? So just given that the industry increased so much, it's way more competitive. You have way better products and services that are being offered than you had back then. I wish I had like a fraction of what we have today back then. So not to say that back then was like terrible, but it was definitely more challenging. And I think for me, like it just, like I made more mistakes because of it. Right. So like, you, like finding mentors, now you can like go to an accelerator, like any accelerator, you finding a mentor, you can like do really quick. Look, you had mentors back then, but in my opinion, it was like more challenging to find them to get approved into programs again, because it wasn't as available. Right. So I think it just made me smart, because I always tell with like other founders that I meet or founders that I work with, it's good to know what to do, but oftentimes it's better to know what not to do, right? And the things, what not to do, it's just what you have to learn through experiences, right? Through little failures, right? And I think any company that you build, it just comes down to succeeding more than you fail, right? Because you will fail constantly, right? There's constant things you will fail in. Either you make an assumption, look, if you raise your first round, right? It's all based on an assumption anyways. Right. And then you put this product or the service into the real market and try to see if you can confirm what your assumption is. And then you have to like, so they may have been correct, they may have been wrong, right? So then you have to pivot. And I call it failure, like it's failing forward, right? There's another term for it. But I think it's extremely important. And I fail to this date all the time. I screw up all the time, right? I just try to like react faster to it and like be aware of it. But I think failure is like very important, and like if you recognize it, you have to like pivot and move quickly, because otherwise the business will just fail.
Yeah, I think that message is really crucial, because I think starting a business, you're gonna hear more no's for everything you want to do than the yeses, especially in the beginning. And you have to be able to withstand that piece to get to the part where people do start to say yes. And you do start to kind of see some of this pay off, right? So what helped you in those times when you were feeling like, okay, I'm just failing, like, I don't know what to do with this, or you're not kind of seeing your initial success? Because I think that's the part like where I do see a lot of people struggling, and even myself, like starting, my own business, like sometimes in the beginning, you're just like, okay, when does this start to like turn around? So yeah, what's your advice for that?
Honestly, I think I am big on education. I read about a book a week, right? So I think learn. Spend time on reading, spend time on learning. Learn how to take constructive criticism. I think that's one of the big issues that we have today, that people take everything as a personal attack. But then what that leads to is that we have, I would say, a lack of proper communication. But if I can tell you this is black, and you will understand it, and I don't have to like describe the color and whatnot, right? I think that leads to misinterpretation. So if I can be more direct, and more blunt, right? I think a lot of people, it's very much Ray Dalio, to be honest, like principles, right? I think you're just more efficient and you're able to move forward quicker, pivot faster. I think it's really, really important. So that was one of the things for sure. But in the same vein, I think this could be a group of peers, this could be a coach. Obviously, I come out of like an athletic background. So coachability, I think, is very important. Being like having constructive criticism is really important. For me, like when you're an athlete and then obviously you go through like your wins and your losses as a player, but also as a businessman or even like an employee, you really need to like see which things actually are good feedback and which aren't. And then I always had coaching. I almost always had coaching. I always had someone that coached me. Then this could be a peer group. This could be a leadership coach, right? That helps you with coaching. And I think it's important. I don't think it's a one size fits all shoe, not at all. But for me, it adds perspective. And the most magical things where I really have these like aha moments is when I have someone or a group of people and I talk to them about something that I do, business, and I trust them, and they may be like so far separated from what I actually do in my day to day. But then they tell you, but have you thought of this? Mm-hmm. And you're like, how did I not think of this? It's like right in front of me. So I think perspective is really important because, I also think there can be two rights and two wrongs. Mm-hmm. Just having a different perspective, right? Like if I look at something from one perspective and someone comes in looking at it from another perspective, right? It maybe help you find those shadows that you didn't account for, right? So, and I think that's super important. And have a little bit of guidance and like constructive feedback. Yeah, that's I think are the most important parts as a business owner, as an employee, and especially if you want to like build something. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I read this in High Growth where they also talk about coachability from an investor perspective, right? Like when you're looking at founders who also show like they're coachable, right? They're willing to hear your perspective and just at least kind of think about it critically and figure out like, how can I apply this? And I know you've also invested in the past and have been in that role. What can you say about that piece? Because I think that's also interesting. It's not just like it's good for you, but I think, your stakeholders are also looking for this, trait.
Yeah, I mean, like, number one, you have a fiduciary responsibilities to whoever your LPs are, right? So you need to take a lot into account and make sure you protect the investment no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a term that I came up with, or I like to say that I came up with it. Who knows? It's probably out there. But I call it founder syndrome, right? So, and I think a lot of founders have it, and the ones that do have it, they're really tough to work with. And to like, so what's the founder syndrome? To me, at least the way I've defined it, it's if you don't take constructive criticism, right? And I get it because it's your baby. So who are you to tell me how to nurture my baby, what to do with my baby, right? And if you give them a constructive criticism, they're like, you don't get it. I was like, I do, but so the people that I think that are the most difficult to invest in, and which is to me like a big red flag, is essentially someone that's not coachable, right? Someone that is like thinks too much about the idea that they had, and I think that's the only way to go about it. I think that's a poison pill, to be honest. I would never invest into someone like that. And I understand you want to sell an investor on your idea, but there's a reason why an investor is able to invest, because they do it for a career, right? And they've seen a lot. And you only like had one startup, or like, look, if you have multiple startups, your likelihood that you get an investment is higher. But I think that's a huge point. And then it really comes down to teams, to be honest. So obviously, like, you have the founder, and you need to make sure that the founder is able to execute, right? And it's interesting, actually, with the founder, it's a very small percentage of founders, right, that can like break through barriers and that just don't take constructive criticism. Well, one of them would be, I would argue, is like Steve Jobs. You have probably like Elon Musk, right? So you have a few of those things that are just like so psychotic about their approach that they just actually are able to like take down walls, right? But that's not most founders. That's the reason why they're like,
Right.
like the top.
There's like 2 or 3 of those people.
0.01% of founders, right? So that's not most founders, and it's very much of an outlier. Most founders are not that. So what you then want to do, even if you have the founder syndrome or if you don't have it, right? You want to build a team around you that basically helps you execute. So, because it makes an investor like feel more comfortable about their investment. If you're like, okay, they built really a good team around it, they have subject matter expertise in it. I think even if the idea is slightly off, they're able to pivot quick enough and and really are able to execute on the business that they want.
Yeah. And how have you seen founders communicate that or display that? Are there certain, indicators that really help you to see that in the founder, that, this team is going to move things forward? What is it specifically? Maybe just a couple of things that you look for?
I mean, so I think there needs to be some sort of diversity, right? So there needs to be different roles that have been taken on, right? So if you, and I can talk about this too, because one of my companies there's another company that I was with that failed, which was the only one that failed. But it was because like there was too many of the same people in the room. So it wasn't agile enough.
Okay.
So if you only have like technical founders, right? They may be like really into the weeds of like how to build something and the processes and whatnot. But you need someone that actually sells it. You need someone that like drives the business, right? So like if you have like an engineer, it's not a CEO that wants to lead large teams, right? They want to like work in a silo and like do what they do best, and that's like programming, coding, and so on. But then like fix problems. Right, but then you need someone that manages this. You need someone that sells it. You need someone that does marketing, right? So like having someone that wears these different hats, it's super, super important. Obviously, you need someone that is like probably one of the easiest things to like outsource for is your finance stacks. But like I can do it. I also have a background in it. But honestly, it's something that founders shouldn't be spending time on, because like why do something that takes away from what you should be doing, that's building the company, right? So whatever you can like delegate, I think that's what you should be doing. I think a lot of founders do it too late. And I catch myself doing that sometimes as well, to be honest, even to this date. Like, I can run a P&L and I can run a QuickBooks and I can like, I have pretty good taste. I can do social media, or whatever it is. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not my subject matter expertise, so I should not be wasting that much time on it. I should be having someone, and I do that, even though I catch myself in it sometimes. I do that and need someone that actually is the expert in this field, right? So obviously, when you have a founding team, and there's a couple of positions that you need, right? And for each company, that's very different. But if you have a founding team and you have really like constructed that team around these different positions and the responsibilities that they have, and each of them can own that category and is an expert in that field, why wouldn't you invest? Right? Because then you're like, okay, they have a great CEO, they have a great engineer, they have a great like whatever marketing person, salesperson, whatever that founding team looks like, whatever you need for that company, it just makes you feel more comfortable. And then of course, right after, you need to have like somewhat of a good idea. I don't think every founder needs to reinvent the wheel. Like you can see it in like consumer products, but like, Liquid Death, great company, right? Like they really just rebranded the way we look at water, right? But then if you go on to like the technology side of things, right? Like, okay, like what are we rebuilding, right? There's a million PEOs out there, right? There's different startup banks out there, right? Some do it better than others, right? And it really comes, I think a lot of it comes down to a preference. And as in particular, how they started, right? So like sometimes they focus on a certain niche category and then they expand later on once they get more funding, etc. Right? But that's, I really think the idea is important, of course. But if you can have the same idea and just be better at it, then you can be extremely successful too. You don't necessarily always need to reinvent the wheel, just need to make it slightly better, right? Which, speaking of, like, one of the companies I worked for, which was actually a larger company that I worked for, was a Series B company in the mid 2010s, sorry, which was a subscription box. And that was a German funded company by Rocket Internet. If you don't know what Rocket does, they basically fed into the ethos that I was talking about earlier. Europeans love American brands. So they would like go to America, they look at the startups, they're like, this is a cool startup, let's copy it, do something similar in Europe. And then once we like own that market, let's bring it back to the US, right? One of the big brands that they're really well known for is HelloFresh, right? So they're like, oh, you have Blue Aprons, let's make it better, let's copy it in Europe, and then we re-enter the market. So I worked for like a similar company, which was a beauty subscription box. So as I said, like I think you can just make things slightly better, and if it can just be like a customer experience, right? Or it's like your better products or a better service, and you can be extremely successful. So having a really good team, having a product that obviously you can sell, and there's not enough of like a TAM, right? Target market. I think that's what you need. And then everything else comes a little bit more like, yeah, it's like your third, your fourth, and your fifth tier. But obviously the more comfortable you make your investors to understand, okay, this is sort of how I think about my business model. These are the things that I believe, this is how I look at go-to-market. This is why I think we're going to be successful in go-to-market. This is how I think we're going to be successful in growth. And then you just have to be like really realistic about also like, where can you take the company? And is this going to be like an IPO or an acquisition? When are you going to exit? Right? I have friends that have companies, and they're very realistic about like, they're like, look, this is going to be like 100 to 100 million AUM company. And that's it. That's the game. It's not going to be like $1 billion, like $3 billion, $5 billion company, right? So you need to be a little bit realistic on sort of like, okay, like what can that market actually support? And then you have to model for that, right? Then you have to model like eventually for that exit. Look, talking about exits at the very beginning, I think you don't need to, honestly. But talking about sort of how you want to grow is really important, right? Okay, we're going to give you this money. How are you going to continue to grow, right? So like, what's phase two, so to say? What's your growth stage?
Yeah, I think I do see this where founders do want to raise, but then they're not very clear on, okay, what do I do once I have the money? Like, what's the plan? Or being able to communicate that clearly and saying, this is exactly how we're going to use this funding, right? And here's how we're going to scale. So it's like, how can someone figure that out? Do you recommend working with certain types of coaches or mentors, just kind of like, so it's not just in your head and you're just kind of going within your own team, but do you look for outside perspective on this?
So, I mean, look, of course you can hire consultants that can like guide you, that have looked at different things. Mm-hmm. You can always hire consultants, right? Yeah. The question is like, should you? Right? Should you that early on spend that much money on a consultant? When a lot of that stuff, and that's sort of what a VC is going to look at as well, or an investor in general, is like, okay, like how smart are they with their own money, right? I also don't think, honestly, that I think most founders should never raise money. I think they will build a great business as a small business or a small medium-sized business, and they can make a lot of money without the risk that comes through venture. But it's sexy. Look, it's very sexy to raise money. It's really sexy to tell someone, hey, look, this and this company gave me money, and it's a proof of it, like a stamp of approval. I get it. It is really sexy. But statistically, most companies fail when you go the venture route, right? So as sexy as that money may seem, there comes a lot attached with it, right? Because you raise now, the investor that gives you money wants to see a return of their investment, ideally a 10x, right? So then you raise again, right? So now the investor you had prior has like, obviously like now you're raising at a higher valuation, but then the next investor wants to see a return. So it's just like, you have to, once you start raising, you're constantly raising because you constantly have to like, you're chasing a return for your investors. And again, you have a fiduciary responsibility to do so, right? If you have a smaller business, you can really take your time to build a smart business, I think, that is sound financially. And then there's different investors out there as well, right? There's obviously venture investors. If you're large enough, maybe like a PE investor is great, right? But there's also angel investors, there's family offices. Each of them have a different risk appetite. Each of them looks at a different profile of businesses. So look, you can look, the Soho House, right? They went public, and then it makes sense. You try to like sell an exclusive membership club, and then you go public. So now you have to like just build this engine and take tens of thousands of members in, and that's great. But it kind of dilutes the club in like what it actually was. And now they're back to private because it just makes more sense for their model, right? So I don't think every business model fits with every financial investor.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you seen that change? Because I imagine when you first started your first business, probably a lot of tech companies, startups probably needed a lot of funding, right? You mentioned like it's really expensive to create an app then. And now, right, like as we kind of look into, AI and how things have sped up, maybe there are more like solo founders and you do have a chance to be more successful in that way. So how would you recommend a founder look at that and say, should I raise or should I just go at this alone, right? Like, how do they make that decision now?
Well, so you don't necessarily have to, you can always have a co-founder, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that going alone without an investor is a different story, right? Again, it just depends what you want. So you can build a super profitable business. You can over time make 5 million AUM in revenue with a great margin, right? And then you have an acquisition and let's say you sell it for like 3-4x. Or you can keep raising, keep diluting yourself, right? So if you sell let's say you have 5 million revenue, you sell for 4x, and you're looking at 20 million. Or you can keep raising, you get to like $100 million valuation, but you only own 20% of it, right? So you get the same amount of money, you spend more time in doing so, right? But your risk factor, your failure factor is much higher, right? So I don't think there's a right or wrong, right? To be honest, I just think it's very much of a personal preference. I think both can be very successful. At the end of the day, you have to be a good entrepreneur. However, I think it became a lot easier to build something, especially with vibe. If I would have been able to program an app back then for, as I said, whatever these vibe code subscriptions are these days, right? Let's call it $1,000, and you can figure out how to solve someone's pain point besides your own. Great, make $40,000 a month and be happy. Take home $500,000. That's great. Or you raise money and you can you take it on a very little salary because you don't want to take too much money out of the business because you want to invest into other areas, right? It really depends. I think people can really figure out with this vibe coding and with how technology is moving today, figure out tiny little pain points and find a market for it. I mean, look, there's plenty of businesses that need updated web pages, right? And I'm sure there's some sort of software out there these days that can make a really sexy web page, right? For no effort, right? Then you go to them and be like, hey, I give it to you for $1,000, $500, whatever. But it costs you $2 to make. Great, So, right. And I'm sure there's plenty of these little business models out there that you can do, There's so many mom and pop small businesses that you can help with a certain need. Super easy. And actually it's funny, I just spoke to a membership club and they're having a little bit of a tech issue because they have a third party provider app, and it's not that great. And I'm now you can as I said, you can pay nothing for it, a fraction of it, and you can have a pretty good members app for very little money. But they have no idea. Right. So you need to also hire for those things. And I think this is where the newer generation has a huge advantage because it's a lot more native to them these days than to us, right? Because I am very much in my own processes, because those are how I was taught and how I learned over the years. Like my process is like, I need to outsource this to someone because I'm not an expert in it, as I said. But maybe I could like build a thing for like on Vibe and figure out the problems, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just not the
Create
way my
an
brain
agent.
works. Yeah.
Right.
It's just not the way my brain works. And like other people can create an agent and like figure it out really well. And they're a lot more native to it. So I think that's a huge advantage with this new generation.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of opportunity with this, and people are experimenting a lot. And of course, there's still a lot of limitations, I think, that stop people from fully just relying on that piece. And I think, you know, people are finding like, oh yeah, actually, maybe we do need a tech person, and I can't just vibe code like everything, right?
I think it gets you. I think it gets you to like a certain point. And I think this is it. In general with tech, I'm a big believer that tech is an assistant to a human, and not that the human is an assistant to the tech. So there's plenty of things like, and I've seen it. There's plenty of accounting softwares out there that, you know, you still have to do human reconciliation, you know, and you will find mistakes, little mistakes, but you will find them, right? So like, I think there needs to always be like a human element in it. And eventually, like, you can outgrow, as I said, you can outgrow certain things, right? So like, I mean, if you make good money with something that you vibe coded, and then now you want to turn it into like a real business, you know, then you invest into that area. Then you just like actually get the tech talent and grow it from there.
Yeah, no, I think the starting point, like, I guess the entry barrier is a little bit lower than it was before.
Way lower.
To like just get started.
The US in general has a very low entry barrier. So if you look at European markets, what it takes to actually build a company and found a company, it's not a market where it promotes entrepreneurship. You know, that's why you have such a brain drain over there, and that's why like talent comes over here, right? That's why people want to race in the US, you know, because the barrier of entry is just way lower than anywhere else. And that's, for me, what makes the American dream a lot more possible.
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge advantage. And so to kind of pivot into talking a little bit about the companies you're currently building, if you can share, you know, how you started that and what you're building, and just your journey into that. Yeah,
so I start with one of the companies that I'm building, and then I segue into the other one, because sort of like one happened because of the other, unexpectedly. So one of my businesses is a leadership network. It's essentially a business network. We combined that with like some leadership coaching as well. The reason why I built this business, so right before I started the business, I was working for a consultancy that did a lot of like fractional finance departments, and I worked with like a lot of VCs, and I worked with a lot of founders. And I just really thought that business networking is very much broken. And the reason why I was successful in that company was sort of because I looked at like the networking and relationship building just from a different lens. And you have this in San Francisco for sure, and you have it in New York as well. Right? They all go to like the same few places, right? They all go to the shed in like San Francisco, right? So, or so they're all like, it's the same restaurants, it's the same places. There's no experience, you know? Even when a company buys like tickets to like a sports game, you know, or whatnot, I'm like, cool. Like I've been to like every company does that, right? I don't think there's an experience in that, right? And a lot of companies just like, I think, lack the experience factor. So I was like, well, how would I want to build a company, and how did I make or like drive business forward? Well, the number one reason is like people like me. Right? The reason why like I had people refer business to me or gave me business or come like is simply because they like me. I was like, okay, like but why is that? Why did they like me? And I truly believe it's good because I'm like, I didn't look at it from a transactional way. I'm like, I want to get to know you as a person, rather than be like, hey, here's my business card. My name is Ruben Austin. I do XYZ. What do you do for a living? Right? In New York is the number one question, right? Everybody wants to know what you do for a living, right? So I was like, well, that kind of sucks. And those rooms suck because it's so transactional. And I've been in a million of those rooms. And I've been to like 1 million restaurants where it's the same private dining space, right? So I'm like, that kind of sucks. So I'm like, okay, how can I make that experience better? So what I created, which is my company All in All, this leadership network. So we, of course, do like talks and panels and all of that, but we do them with this spin, one. And two, when we do our member only events, which may be like a soiree or a dinner party or anything else, we have a very strict non-soliciting rule when it comes to our member only events. So you basically trust the network of the members that are in there, and you walk into a room with incredible minds, but you can't talk about business. And it's something really special happens when you can't talk about business, because especially when you're a founder, it's what you breathe, right? And as an investor, it's just like, okay, who can I invest in, right? But now you're like forced to get to know them with their interests, right? And like what they like to do. And all of a sudden you just build really true lasting relationships and friendships without it being so transactional. And then if you want to meet afterwards for a coffee or a drink, knock yourself out, talk all the business you want, just not in that room. So that's one of the things. And I think where we host these things. So I'm fortunate enough that I have great friends. Some of them are investors, like one of my best friends, Gautam Ahuja, who's also a VC. He allows me to use like his beautiful, stunning like Soho loft. Right. I have another friend. He's a member of ours. He has a beautiful like apartment as well in Soho, a penthouse. So I think I like to host at members, like at the houses, apartments, because I think it adds another touch of exclusivity, but also like it makes it more private and more personal. Because like, I mean, like my art's in the background, right? Like, so like people walk into my apartment and I have like probably like 30, 40 pieces of art in here, and you have a conversation, right? So I collect books, and I have like a bunch of books. Like you constantly just like, it's just such a more personal space that allows you to sort of let down your guard and actually like enjoy the room. And then of course, like we bring in like private catering, we have like private chefs that do everything. So the experience is very different, because the last thing I want to do is like sit at another private dining room that I've been to like 5 times already to the same, because as I said, they booked the same place.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Then actually have like a real wholesome experience. So that's sort of like what I look for. Talks and panels we do too, as I mentioned. And there, I think the differentiator is like same thing. You want to kind of like, I want to do stuff and attend things that I'm interested in. So for the VCs or the investors that we have in our network, or the founders in our network, right? Because we're obviously looking for like a certain level of leadership. They already know most of these like VC panels, most of the business panels. Like the last thing they want is another AI talk. So what do we do instead? We have a talk about art collecting. We have a book club, which we actually host at the Yale Club. We do longevity talks, right? We do like a lot of things like this where like people are actually personally interested in this stuff, right? And now you like attend these things with like people where you have shared interest. And I think that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes us successful, is because it's just not another one of those. It's where you have the right people in the room that are interested in similar things. Which tonight, actually, we have a partnership with this company that does a symphony. So which each symphony and song they're playing, there's a paired wine to it, which is going to be really fun. So yeah,
that does sound fun,
right? So like you're listening to it, and like they really came up with like a different wine for the different tunes to like, so it's like a journey through music with wine. And that stuff is fun, right? Like I much rather do that than like, as I said, like go to another happy hour at a random bar, right?
Yeah.
So, and don't get me wrong, those are useful too. I think they're crucial for the ecosystem, right? Andrew Young like crushes it. I think he's like people like him are super important in the ecosystem, right? But there's like just different places you can look for like different things. So I think it's super important that you have like all types of layers, right? For different stages that you're in your professional career, and not everything has to be for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of the businesses. And then through that, one of my members approached me, and she was like, look, I need someone like you to help me build this business. And she had this really cool idea, and it's a yoga studio. And if you would have told me like 6 months ago that I'm going to be involved in a yoga studio, I'd be like, no way. I'm like, hell no. But even though I practice yoga without her knowing, but like me building one is like, but then like we really spoke about it, and she had this really interesting and unique idea where she like wants to like combine immersiveness. So she has an immersive museum, basically projections on the wall of different places, with yoga. So we basically came up with like a concept where we teleport you to different places in the world. And that's all like with temperature, sound, and scent, right? So like we really teleport you to different places in the world. And then we built a concept around it. We got really great people involved in it. And as I said, like the team is really important, as I mentioned earlier. And that's sort of now I know what to look out for. I mean, there's mentors out there I recommend people to get, or like if you have someone that built a company before or someone that is on the investment side, go talk to them. I'm fortunate enough that a lot of those are my friends. So I stress tested these ideas a lot. That we now are at a stage where we're actually about to kick off our fundraise in February. And it's really interesting. So, but like we had a big focus on the team, obviously on the concept. It's a physical location, right? So one of my investor friends actually was Gautam, who I mentioned earlier. He said one crucial thing. He said, when you have a physical location, the most important part is maximizing revenue per square footage. And once he said that, like it opened up a whole new arena of like how we thought about the business. So we have like a longevity focused cafe, right? So you will have like your $30, $40 like peptides infused drinks, right? And then we have a really great guy. Look out for like the announcement that is actually like going to do it for us, who's like what we're known for, like his nutrition. So it's and that's what it is. So then you build a team around that help you lead that, and then the investor sees like, oh wow, they really thought about and like constellated the right people. Because if you bring the right people into the business, this is also a signal to the investors like, oh, these people are taking a chance on them, especially if they're known, very well known, right? These people are taking a chance on this business because they believe in this business, that they wanted to be involved so heavily in this. So that's a huge signal to the investors. So I hope we don't have any fundraising issues so far. Everybody that I spoke to about it, to get them interested there, they think it's a great idea. So we'll see. But I think it's like identifying idea, and it's really interesting, especially with this one. As I said, like no idea I was going to be involved in a yoga brand 6 months ago. But then when you actually really look, okay, like what is the differentiator? Where's the market going? You analyze the market, you see the hiccups in the market, where's an arbitrage that you can like capitalize on, right? So it's like, you really need to like identify it. And like, if it just would have been like, here's another yoga studio with like big airy walls, I wouldn't have gotten involved. But because it's so different and we actually conceptualized it and now build a brand around it that makes sense, people are really excited about it. Right? So like, I think going from idea to actually a brand that you can race for, there's a huge distance in between that you have to account for, right? So
yeah.
And there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there as well. There's a lot of people that love to come up with an idea and they're like, oh, I want to build this, but they never actually execute on it, right? And there's a great book for that to read. It's called Courage is Calling. Basically, it's like just jump.
Yeah, I think, well, first, I just want to say with both of your companies, they're very experience-based, right? So you're basically curating a certain kind of experience for the members. What led you into that kind of space? Because I think, at least from what I'm seeing as well, like people do want more of these like in-person experiences and communities, because I think we've kind of lost some of that touch with everything being online. What was your thought process to like, go towards this experience space?
So I have to credit my mom again. My mom was an incredible host throughout my childhood. She had the coolest dinner parties. I was shucking oysters since I've been a kid. So for me, it was always like and I love hosting too. Right? It's just like in my ethos. I love cooking. I love hosting. So for me, it's like all about like being thoughtful with people. And I think that just returns tenfold. So it's sort of like how like maybe it's a European household. I mean, look, I was in a German-British household. Germans are not too well known for being the most warm-hearted people. I like to argue, but I think we are. But yeah, so like I grew up in a household where like my mom was just constantly hosting, and I think that having that experience at heart, I think it's really interesting. And I agree with you. With all in all, my leadership network, that was more about like, okay, like I think people are just tired of this regular in real life events.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think like everybody does this and there's nothing special about it. So that was my thesis there. It was really just something I wanted to build for myself, to be honest. You know, I just wanted to do stuff the way I can do business and have a blast doing so, you know? And then with Origin, which is the yoga brand, you identified it correctly. The entire consumer market is moving into experiences, right? So but like there's two types of experiences that I see. Is the ones where it's like a community built around it and people just having like just a very different experience. So in the wellness space, you have like all these bathhouses that are opening up, right? Remedies, like other ships, right? But also like Equinox was probably like the first gym brand that came with an experience and like, here's some iron, go pump it, which is my preferred way to do it, but not for everybody else. And then you have these membership clubs as well. You have this huge rise of membership clubs. There's 80 of them now in New York. This includes like legacy clubs. So everybody's like looking for like different experiences, and we identified that. The other thing I think where the consumer market is going towards is collaborations, which I think is part of experience as well, right? So for me, if you can cannibalize my network and I can cannibalize someone else's network and both of us can benefit of that, right? I think that's great. So like, I mean, like you have Van ice cream times Netflix, right? You have Skims times Nike, right? So you have like these constant collaborations where they're just like poaching each other's like networks or customers, which I think it's great, right? So like, and they're cool, you know, like obviously like the people that like done this really well, it's like Supreme, they're known to do these things. I remember when there was like Supreme newspaper and like people couldn't get their hands fast enough on like just newspaper or like an ashtray or like whatever, right? So yeah. I think something like that is like, it's something really cool and special that we're seeing in the environment when it comes to consumer, where it's like, it's more about the experiences and the collaborations. Yeah. So what drew me to it, I think just seeing that, and again, like the yoga studio was not my idea, but I saw where the market is going, and that's where I actually thought that's where I got involved, because I was like, I want to, and I told her, I want to be a co-founder, and she's like, okay, let's do it.
Amazing. It's also great when those relationships happen naturally. So creating that environment with your network business is great, because like, you know, people see you and they get to know you, and you also get to know them. And so you already have that relationship formed. So that trust is kind of already there, right? So it makes it easier to then talk about these ideas.
But I think just in general, like when you're part of a network, a community, and this is not a blog to like join us, but like if you're part of something and you have like-minded people in there, right? Exchanging your thoughts, I think, becomes crucial, right? And it's a room that you trust and opinions that you respect. And look, like it could have been any other member that came up to me and would have been like, hey, do you want to build this? So, and there's a ton of business that happens in these rooms, but like not just like that's what happened with me, but I know other members that invest into different companies. I know people that like started like large partnerships on it, you know, people that are now like actually like branching out to like do their own thing, right? So, and I think just having a room, it's almost like you go to like business school. So the reason why people go to business school is so like they can like network, right? And like find great people that they can really rely on. And then of course we have like our way, how we like look at profiles and people that fit into what we want to do. So you have almost like the same ethos, the same morals. So if you can trust that, I think things just become a lot more easier to do business.
And I guess that's a great way to also ask you, what types of members, you know, are you looking to add to All in All?
All in All. Yeah, it's funny. Like I came up with the name because a lot of people think it's like All In, but like
I know. I think I was thinking of the podcast when I said it, like the name.
Yeah, like I use the saying All in All like quite a bit. Because it's just like everything in one place. So I finished a lot of sentences with it, and then a friend of mine kind of pointed it out, and then I was like, oh, maybe I'll call it this. It's kind of everything in one place. So the type of member profiles, look, we're looking for leaders. Leadership is not a linear thing, right? So at the end of the day, it really we're looking at their profiles. If you're like a first-time founder and you're right out of school, you're probably not for us. Unless you have like an incredible track record and like raise a large round or whatever, we may consider you. But we really want to have a room that has enough experience where you can really exchange thoughts, right? So it comes down to experience and leadership, right? If you have led teams and so on. So it's just so happened to be that we have a ton of VCs and private equity, and I would say like investors probably make up 60-70% of our members, followed by founders, followed by executives. So that just could be like people that work in like leadership positions, like C-suites or executive positions at different companies. And obviously founders, we look for particular founder profiles. We also just don't want it to be all SaaS because we're looking for perspective. And that's sort of what we're looking for. But like trying to source for leadership is really interesting. We actually decided to move away from outbound sales, and now it's purely referral only. So our members actually have to refer other members in order to be accepted. Because you have the YPOs and like, look, they're great, but they're like only 1% of applicants get in. I was like, yeah, that means like 99% of your applicants is just shitty deal flow. Right? It's like, and then you waste so much time trying to like look through whoever that needle in the haystack is, right? It's just a waste of time for your team, where I much rather have much less people applying, but close 80% of them, you know? So it's sort of flipping the script a little bit, right? Like you can like spin it and sound very exclusive. Like 99% of the people don't get in. But for me, it's like, well, that's just terrible deal flow. So like find good deal flow.
So in terms of, resources, you've mentioned quite a few of them, but any that you want to like call out as we wrap up this call to just say, these are things that really helped me along my journey, whether it's to building companies or raising funding, just anything that founders and leaders can maybe tap into.
Yeah, I think coaches are very important, especially the earlier you are in your journey, the more crucial it is. I don't think mentors are the best ones. I think coaches are the best ones, to be honest. I think that's super important. I think having a good attorney, super important. I mean, you have, as I said, you have the big ones, the JP Morgans, the SVBs, but then you have like people like Brex, like Roe, Roe is incredible here in New York. I mean, you have Ramp, you have Mercury, like they're all great. They all have the benefits. You just need to like figure out which one is the right fit for you. I think those were resources I was lagging back then. And now these days, you have these resources available. Fractional, like CROs, CMOs, any fractional C-suite as an early stage funnel, you really don't need it. Being able to get fractional leaders is incredible because now you can get like the former CMO or the former CFO of like Sony for an hourly rate on a fraction of the time, and they will be able to look around corners for you in no time because they have the experience, right? So I think that's a very unique model, and I think it's super, super helpful, and I can highly recommend finding the right fractional people. And you don't need it for like every single position either. But once you're ready, you can look into that, unless you have someone really killer that outweighs basically the salary that you would pay them, right? I think those are great resources. I think showing up is the most important part for a founder. Go to the events. Honestly, like try to get into the events that are hard to get into. Just showing up is, I think, the biggest differentiator, because eventually you go to the like one VC event, one tech event, one service provider event, and like, by the way, the banks and all the service providers do a ton of those. So if you bank with them, great benefit already, because they're probably going to tell you or invite you to those. So show up, because you will start running into the same people. Those may be junior VC people, like an analyst at a fund. Those may be some people like that have an idea and like, or a service provider But having those conversations and constantly showing up, eventually they're going to be like, weren't you at this event? And you're like, yeah, I was, right? So showing up is really, really important. The more you show up, the more you'll be recognized. And then, as I said, I don't know if we spoke about this earlier or if I just said that to you off the recording, but trying to develop credibility for your name. But there's this personal branding thing that you need to start developing. And I think trying to like be on panels and share the experience that you can share. But don't be a phony. Really, really, really important. Right. So and I think now everybody is trying to be like someone, everybody can have a podcast. It's really important that you can actually like have a like subject matter expertise in what you want to preach. And then like try to be on panels, try to be on podcasts. But don't just be on there and trying to like educate someone. Don't try to like paint yourself as an investor, but you only made like 2 angel investments of like $2,000, right? And try to like tell them, right. Like, no, that would be like, I think like my biggest to-dos if I would be starting from zero.
Thank you for sharing those wonderful tips and suggestions. I know you mentioned you also read a lot. So are there any like books that you feel like founders should kind of add to their list and make sure get to it? Yeah.
So many.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I read a book a week. So I can quote plenty of books. One of my favorite reads is called The Lessons of History by William Ariel Durant. And it talks about cycles from like socioeconomic to religion to values, liberty, everything. Very timely, because I think we constantly are in cycles, and it's a pulsing thing. Obviously you have like 0 to 1. That's a great book. It really depends like sort of what you're looking for. I love Principles as well. Like Finding Courage is a great one from Ryan Holiday. There is so many good books. I think at the end of the day, what people should just do, sort of find what they're interested in and then like dig into those and read more classics. Honestly, I think a lot of people don't read the classics anymore, and like they're just so good. And I read everything. I've read Russian literature because like the whole Ukrainian thing happened. I was like, I want to know more about that literature. No, but like I think if I would recommend one book, it's The Lessons of History by William and Ariel Durant. Best book, honestly. I don't think there's many better books than that. Yeah. That's probably one of the best books I can recommend. Yeah, if I would have to pick one. It's not my favorite book, but it's definitely like a very eye-opening book. And if you read as much self-help books as I have, honestly, 80% of those books that's in the book, it's all the same stuff. And then you have like 20% that's like original idea. The rest is like the same sort of habits. There's tons of great books, but it all comes down, I think, especially when it comes to self-help, just discipline, consistency, and constructive feedback. That sums up 90% of all books.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it kind of sums up probably the things you need to do as a founder, building a business too. Is there anything that we did not touch on that you wanted to share before we close the episode?
Look, I think be more intentional with like how you want to meet people. I think that's important. I think, as I said, I like to host. My mom is the one that like taught me that. Breaking bread with someone is very, I'm not saying go to a restaurant, actually like making the bread, spilling some wine, getting a laugh out of it. I think it's just something about that just doesn't replace it, or like nurturing someone with like the food that you prepare. I think nothing beats that relationship, honestly. You can take them to the fancy Michelin star restaurant and that's great. And they will look at you as like a business associate, and then you invite them to your home and you make them a home cooked meal with some other people. And then all of a sudden you connect on a personal level. So if you want to close real business and if you want to build real relationships in business or in friendships, look, it doesn't have to be cooking. If you can make a killer cocktail, make a killer cocktail.
Right.
Yeah, everybody can figure out one thing that they're good at.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's what it is. It's like, that's how you build long-term relationships that you can like use and tap into for the rest of your life, and they become genuine. It's not even like those people want to help you, and it's not even like oftentimes you don't even have to ask them.
Yeah. And probably, you too, right? Like you're invested in that relationship. So you also want to show up and help where you can. And it doesn't feel transactional. It just feels like,
I have another thing.
Mutual understanding. Yes.
because you said that. Don't guard your network. And I can tell you why. And I have a lot of people that do it. And look, I guard it to an extent, of course, as well. But I think most people will only think, it's like, okay, like, what can I give them? Or what do I get out of this? Right? I don't guard my network. Anybody can ask me for any introduction. I may not give it to them. And there's only one reason why I don't give it to them. It's because I don't know enough about that person. And I don't know if it's going to be mutually beneficial. But if I know them well enough and I think it's a mutually beneficial introduction, I would never say no. Never. I would be like, go run with it. And the most important part why is just because something may be something that I don't see doesn't mean it's something that they don't see. Right? So now if I add value to both parties, that will come directly back to me. Why would I be in the way of something great? Makes no sense.
Right.
So I'm happy to be the person. Actually, I want to be that person that connected you to the next OpenAI investment. I want to be that person that introduces you to your wife. I want to be that person. So why not?
Yeah. And I mean, you've created your whole business around this, right? You're kind of the connector too, right? As much as people are referring other people to join, you're also bringing that person in and helping them to access the network that you've built. So
exactly,
you're doing that on many different ways. So that's incredible.
But
and I feel like
thank
that's
you so much for having me.
Yeah, that's a great advice to end on. And thank you so much for the time and for being on here.
I appreciate it. And as always, if there's anything I can help you with or anybody that's listening to this, feel free to connect with me out on Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. Just don't call me at 2 a.m. in the morning, though I probably will respond. But yeah, happy to help where I can if it makes sense. Let's all grow together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Little Pursuits podcast. Please follow, subscribe, and share this with one builder who needs it. Check out the show notes for links to connect with us and our guests.